In life, we always have someone who is our opposite. Thorfinn and Canute are two very intriguing characters, but how are they in relation to each other? Let's find out. Hey, what's up guys, this is Doran here. Today let's talk about the dynamics between Thorfinn and Canute, the two main characters of Vinland Saga. In a lot of ways, Canute can be seen as Thorfinn's foil and exact opposite. However, how different are they in reality? So, let's actually take a step back and analyze the two characters here. Now, Thorfinn and Canute portray two kinds of messed up men, or well rather, two young men who have suffered through a life, and they actually come from different backgrounds, whereas we see that obviously Thorfinn is more prominently from a background which is rather poorer, whereas Canute is from a background. Canute literally descends from direct royalty and was raised in literally a kingdom. So that's actually some place to start. And when we are first introduced to these characters, we first see that Thorfinn is quite brash and not afraid to say whatever is on his mind, whereas Canute is more timid and more mellow and quite docile. Yeah, and Canute is quite philosophical on top of that, whereas Thorfinn is rather direct and to the point and is quite tactical as well, which is something that Canute actually lacks at this point, since Canute is more or less isolated from the rest of the world and on his own. So we already have two different characters right here. One who literally emphasizes prominent traits of masculinity and being direct and more hands-on, whereas the other is more feminine, or rather more intellectual in this respect and more distant. So we already have two different characters established when we are first introduced to each other. But are they really this different though? So let's actually take a step back. So first of all, let's take a step back and we remember when we are first introduced to Thorfinn, we realize that he is actually quite an optimistic boy who is quite idealistic and looking forward to the future, before of course a tragic incident happens in Thorfinn's life. And whereas Canute, now here's the interesting part, Canute and Thorfinn were at one point the same. So Canute, when we first see Canute, we obviously see him with Thorfinn, but when we see Ragnar talk about Canute's childhood and past, we see that he was actually no different from Thorfinn back then. So what happened that made these two characters change their trajectories in their life and end up manifesting paths that directly are each other's shadow? Well, what happened there? Well, first of all, let's also look at other factors that Thorfinn and Canute have in common. You know how I mentioned how Thorfinn was from a lesser aristocratic background? Well, here's a funny bit though. Thorfinn also descends from royalty, since his mother Helga was literally, yeah, you know the backstory with Helga and how Thor's actually had to take her off this position of power and actually had to take her with him. So we already have this established that Thorfinn is also from a very prestigious background and he's not really just some random guy. On top of the fact that Canute is also not someone who is on the top of the hierarchy, as he was actually looked down by his father and his brother was the one who was initially going to be the next king. But Canute was still people like Ragnar, very few people like Ragnar actually still believed in Canute. So yes, we see that Thorfinn and Canute have a lot of similarities in this regard. So however, let's take a look at Thorfinn. So Thorfinn as we see actually ends up being more brutal, and his childhood really is brutal and made to be relatable for young boys who have gone through lots of trauma, especially ones that have gone through a trauma to the point where they literally develop symptoms such as PTSD and are literally awaiting danger. As we can see that where Thorfinn is literally approached by a girl while he is resting in the shack where Askeladd and his crew take refuge, we literally see Thorfinn misinterpret this and he literally gets ready to attack when all she does is want to talk to him. So we already see a difference in Thorfinn's perception that develop because of his traumas. And similarly with Canute, we see that Canute is quite soft and lacks purpose initially. Now let's take a deeper look at Canute. So Canute, when we are introduced to him, unlike Thorfinn, whose main goal is to get somewhere in life, and Canute, on the other hand, is quite different in this regard. He actually lacks a meaning in life and actually wants a purpose that he strongly believes in. By the time the first season ends, we see the development these two characters take, whereas here's the interesting part. Thorfinn has a purpose in life, Canute lacks a purpose in life, but towards the end, when Askeladd dies, we see that Thorfinn loses his purpose in life, whereas Canute gains his purpose in life. Also, here's the interesting part. Thorfinn, as we see, is quite weak initially, but he gets stronger. Literally, he is quite strong and physically really adept, whereas Canute is more philosophical and he has reflected more about the deeper meanings of life, whereas Thorfinn has not, and he's literally even chastised by Askeladd for this, where Askeladd once even questions Thorfinn about what he even plans to do once Thorfinn finally kills Askeladd, and Thorfinn just ignores it and copes up and just tries to attack Askeladd and ignores the deeper question that Askeladd asks, as Thorfinn really did not have any other thing on his mind there, whereas Canute was different in this regard. He was actually distancing himself from his responsibilities to look towards the deeper meanings of life. But this all changes, however, when Askeladd finally dies. Now here's the interesting part. We see Canute, who is soft, go from soft to literally soft, really confident and really respected by everyone. And we see Thorfinn literally just runs away from the battlefield, and now we see the development in these two characters. Ironically enough, they actually end up becoming how they were when they first met. They end up becoming each other. We see a lot of Jungian archetypes at play here, whereas Thorfinn and Canute accurately represent each other's shadows. And Thorfinn, as we see, Thorfinn ends up becoming more philosophical, and Canute, on the other hand, is more bolder now. And Thorfinn, since he's more philosophical, actually has started to reflect more upon the deeper meanings of life, whereas Canute, as he's more stronger, he has also started to take up combat, and he's actually on par with Thorfinn right now. Arguably, Thorfinn is still much stronger, but yeah, Canute is very noticeably quite strong now, and he's literally even respected by his men now, whereas his men actually even mocked him at first, even though they were his own men. So that's an interesting development that these two young men take. And towards the time they actually meet, at the end of season 2, here's the interesting part now. They actually meet, and after meeting after several years, they find that they still understand each other better than any other person understands them. And Canute literally actually ends up laughing when Thorfinn finally gives his speech to him. And not to mention the fact that after Thorfinn gives his speech to him, it actually is quite intriguing, because it turns out that deep inside, like I mentioned earlier, Thorfinn and Canute did desire the same thing. As I mentioned earlier, when they were both young unassuming boys, they were literally at the same place at one point, but they actually ended up taking different journeys and became each other's opposites totally. But at the end, they do still dualize with each other in this aspect, is that they actually want the same thing, but they train these things through different means. And Canute actually even highlights that point, and we literally see all this play out. So that's quite interesting. So at the end, it's interesting to note that even though Thorfinn is raised on the battlefield, Canute is literally raised within royalty. It's interesting to note that both of these boys go through immense trauma and development throughout their times, and actually have to mature up, and literally share the same vision, although they have different means of attaining that said vision. So it's interesting to note that that these two dynamics are actually quite reminiscent of many other historical figures as well. You know which two I'm talking about, by the way. I'm not going to mention them in this video, but yeah, Thorfinn and Canute are actually quite accurate representations of such figures. And on top of the fact that Thorfinn and Canute are also great because they literally give, since since the author himself actually acknowledges the fact several times in the manga that the reader reading, he doesn't want to make Thorfinn and Canute more identifiable, and since Thorfinn is someone who is more brought up in a boyish environment, and Canute is more pampered and brought up the way a lot of girls are, so and is also from a better house than Thorfinn is. So we actually see how this interplays with the idea that at the end of the day, everyone is sort of equal, and everyone is going to go through a lot of trauma in life, despite whatever societal hierarchy they are from. So that's actually quite intriguing to take note of. So yeah, with that out the way, what can we learn from Thorfinn and Canute? Well, they both teach us the same thing, and that would be that we must, as Karl Marx even said, we must struggle to actually move forward. Now, I'm not a Marxist myself, but yeah, they still actually represent the element of struggle, and that's quite intriguing to watch. And that their development is also quite identifiable by a lot of viewers. Some people may find Canute more relatable, and others may find Thorfinn more relatable, depending on however they grew up. But at the end of the day, we see that they both are actually the same, and since Thorfinn and Canute, despite their various differences, and is the fact that their differences are very superficial, and deep down at the inner layers they are quite literally the same. The same can be said for every other person that exists, since we are at the end of the day all interconnected and quite similar. So with that out the way, this was my commentary and my analysis on the dynamics between Thorfinn and Canute and how great these characters are. And Vinland really did a great job at portraying these characters and these dynamics. And with that out the way, if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to drop a like and subscribe for more quality content. With that out the way, thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you guys next time. With that out the way, take care, gamers, and peace. Stay safe, gamers. Bye.